Well, there's two systems there, Jonathan. There's the social welfare system, which is very well established, running like clockwork for a long time. And the revenue system, similarly very well established, and also running like clockwork for a long time. And it is a matter of ease from the technology point of view to allow those systems integrate or to talk to each other, as Minister Joan Burton said the other day. She said that was difficult. It is not. It is utterly easy.
Well, why has it not happened then if it's so easy?
Well, the reason it hasn't happened is a much more subtle question. It's a question of policy. The policy is whether or not you wish to integrate social welfare systems in principle with revenue systems in principle. They have quite different purposes in society. And I would be of the opinion that you shouldn't really have the revenue people looking down over the shoulders of the people running the social welfare system. And that's much closer to the reason why these two systems have not been integrated. From the computerization point of view, it's a very easy thing to do, especially in recent times, because we have a PPS number for every person.
Why would you be so reluctant, Joe?
Matters of policy. I mean, and it comes to the heart of this question of child benefit. Child benefit is a means of income for the child itself. It's not a means of income for the parent. So it's not the parent's tax position that should be brought to bear, as you might think. Minister Varadkar said he would be quite happy to be taxed. The implication is that he was getting the money. But he's not, even if he is the recipient, it's quite often it's the wife who is the recipient of the money. The money isn't in the hands of the parent. The money is in trust for the child. So it's the child's money.
Yeah, but if that's the case, why don't they put the money into a separate bank account that the child can get access to when they're 18? That doesn't make any sense from that argument.
Well, it does. Quite a lot of people who can afford to would put the child's money into a bank account, and they do keep it for when the child is 18. But many, many people actually need the money to provide for the child, which is the purpose of the payment in the first place. So you have to ask yourself the social question, what is the purpose of the payment? And then you have to ask yourself a much more difficult question, is it fair that some people who are really well off should be getting this payment or not? And that's sort of the debate that's been going on for the last few weeks.
Yeah, but behind that debate, we have been given the argument that we can't do this. It's very difficult to do it from a technology perspective. Yet here we have massive companies that are integrating all the time. Their IT systems are being merged on a regular basis. So what you're telling me is it could quite easily be done.
Oh, it can be very easily done, Jonathan, and that is an utterly fallacious argument, and it is unfair of ministers to be telling us that we're unable to stitch these systems together, when in fact what they're not able to do is make up their mind on what to do. If you gave me the task of integrating the social system with the PPS number of the child and the revenue system with the PPS number of the parent or the recipient, sometimes it's the guardian, I would integrate those two systems in a month for a small few bob. It's not difficult to do at all. But you would have to tell me what the policy rule is. I'm going to tax so-and-so. You have to decide who the person is. Is that person a parent? Is it the mother or is it the father? And you would have to tell me that, because I couldn't. I'm just a programmer. But I have the numbers. And in fact, the revenue people have all these numbers for taxpayers. They do not have the same numbers necessarily for the children. But the social welfare do.
Yeah, the PPS number. Every child, my two kids got a PPS number within a couple of hours of them being born. So, I mean, what's the purpose of giving them a PPS number if they're not going to use it to have some form of joined-up thinking?
Well, the joined-up thinking is essential from the social systems point of view. So that's why your child does get one. And the PPS number, everybody now has a PPS number in order to deal with the state. But there is still a fundamental boundary between the social side and the revenue side, which is of some merit, and it requires quite a lot of careful thought before you decide arbitrarily, okay, we're going to glue these together and we're going to let the revenue people take tax off children. Because ultimately that's what you're doing.
You're listening to Lunchtime on News Talk with Jonathan Healy. We're speaking with independent IT consultant Joe McCarthy. Joe, we've been talking to some people off the record in the civil service, and they're telling us that a lot of the issues involved here could come down to things like data protection, that various different organs of state might be prohibited from looking at what the other organ might have because of data protection rules. Is there anything in that argument?
That's a complete nonsense, Jonathan. I mean, in the first instance, the Department of Social Welfare itself has both the child's name and PPS number and the recipient's name and PPS number, most often the mother, but quite often a parent or occasionally a guardian. It's interesting if you look at it from a guardian's point of view. Because suppose some poor child had their parents die in a car accident, let's say some young chap, and he's 4, and he's now in the care of his elderly aunt. But his elderly aunt is really well off. Now, you want to tax the money that the child has. Is that the aunt being taxed for the child's money, or is the child being taxed for his own money? You get into really awkward questions of deciding what to do. The technology to do it is here today. We can do it straight away. The data protection issues don't arise between organs of the state, in my opinion. They are part of the same administration of our society. So to suggest that there's a data protection limitation on the left hand not talking to the right hand, there's sort of three hands to this, because there's the recipient who is generally in trust for the child, there's the child who's entitled to the payment, and then there's the possible other partner, the wife or the husband, the second parent. So you've got a three-way dance that has to be resolved to decide who should get taxed. I mean, are you going to tax the mother? Quite often we hear that the reason that this is such a strong universal payment is that even in apparently wealthy households where things look really comfortable, the mother, in fact, is not getting enough money to mind the children, and thus the receipt into the mother's hands of this money is of significant benefit to the children.
On data protection, though, I mean, there's many organs of state involved here. I mean, you could have the Department of Justice. We don't have ID cards here, which would be under the remit of the Department of Justice. Could the PPS number not serve for something like that?
Well, it could, but there's a challenge there. The PPS number itself is self-evidently an identifier for a citizen, but we don't in this country actually have a citizen's ID number as such. And in the past, the Data Protection Commissioner has said you may not use the PPS number itself across departments for its obvious purpose of identifying the citizen. That approach can't be done unless, again, a policy decision is made by government that says this is the citizen number, and then off you go. And we all have a PPS number, as they do in many civil law countries in Europe, where you have to have your ID card actually on you in your normal course of perambulating around the streets. But in this country, we don't have that. We have the common law jurisdiction where people are private unto themselves. You're not particularly allowed to be stopped by guards unless the guard has suspicion. Although I think you do still have to give them your name and address, but you don't have to give them your PPS number. So the PPS number itself is still a private identifier for you in the agency you're dealing with, and it's not a cross-agency number, not yet. But it's easily done to be a cross-agency number, but it would require a policy decision from government.
Okay, so we get the idea that it's a policy issue, and that, you know, if they are going to tax child benefit, it's going to be the child that is taxed based on the parent's income, and that's where government might have to review policy.
Sorry, Jonathan, you cannot tax the child. It's unlikely, for example, in the existing systems that the tax, the amount of money that the child would receive would reach the taxable levels.
Yeah, but it's in effect what we're talking about is the taxing of the child benefit. Taxing the child benefit would be taxing the child benefit
in the hands of a well-off parent.
Yeah. Okay. Joe, we would have spoken to you in the past about electronic voting and the idea that the system that was being brought in was a complete nonsense. It was open to hacking. It was open to all sorts. Last week we had Brendan Howlin on the programme talking about the reforms and promising better integration and better use of IT. I mean, the one thing I put to him was we haven't had a great history in Ireland of putting in proper and effective IT systems. How is the government going to avoid falling into the same trap that they've fallen into before with things like PPARs?
Oh, this is a classic problem, Jonathan. PPARs is a notorious example of trying to use an IT system, an expensive IT system, to implement policy changes. What they were trying to do with PPARs was to implement policy changes across 23 branches, hospitals and regions of the HSE, where they had multiple different wage scales, multiple different holiday rates, multiple different allowances, and they were trying to implement a consolidated change by forcing it through payroll. And of course it collapsed. It didn't work at all. And that's a mistaken attempt to use IT instead of implementing good management. You must do the good management first. The IT will follow along. IT is relatively straightforward. It's relatively fast. It's relatively stupid. It does exactly what it's told, and it does it extremely quickly and extremely accurately. But it doesn't do policy. Policy is done by people and by good management, and that's what's missing.
So you're effectively saying that they're maybe putting the cart before the horse?
Well, no, I do agree with one thing that Minister Howlin said. Shared services is an extremely good idea, where you have a single, solid, well-resourced central services agency doing the payroll for everybody. They didn't quite get that right for the hospitals because they had so many different payroll scales. They had 2,500 payroll scales. But they're beginning to get to grips with the vacation situation. So you only get 32 days holidays now, or down to 30, or whatever they've decided recently, instead of race days here and festival saints days there around the country in different places. We should have a consolidated approach to it. And then we should also have a consolidated approach to wage scales so that the one payroll system in the middle would work. That's a good shared service to establish. And that, I think, is where he's going. And if he does do it that way, with policy changes in advance that have been agreed, perhaps under the Croke Park Agreement or otherwise with the unions, if they've been agreed, then they'll implement very well. And then they'll work like clockwork. And that's using IT to its best effect.
OK. Joe McCarthy, independent consultant and IT expert with Archaon Limited. Thanks for talking to us, Joe.
OK, Jonathan. Best of luck.